You know, we've all grown up hearing the stories of kings and their conquests. And every major city has some really cool history, but nothing else compares to this place. This is the story of Istanbul. So when people tend to think about the history of Istanbul, most people start thinking from Roman times because that's when some monumental historical things happened. But people have lived in what is Istanbul today for 3,000 years. And this used to be a pretty important city in ancient Greece called Byzantium, which was established back in the 7th century BC because of this place's strategic location between Europe and Asia, connecting the Bosphorus to the Mediterranean Sea. And if you want to get a better understanding of the pre-Roman history of this place, I would very strongly recommend checking out the Istanbul Archaeology Museum, which is right next to all the other famous museums in the heart of Sultanahmet. Okay, so I'm inside the Archaeology Museum of Istanbul, and I haven't even stepped in the building yet, but you can already see all these major busts and statues from ancient Rome and ancient Greece surrounding the place. But let's go and check out some of the major exhibits now. Behind me right now is the Alexander sarcophagus, which is one of the main attractions of this museum. And this was built around 4th century BC, so like 2,400 years ago, and has markings of Alexander the Great on it. And it was once believed this sarcophagus was actually created for Alexander the Great. Now, if you pay close attention to this sarcophagus, you'll notice that it's almost built in the structure of a Greek temple. That was something they used to do with ancient Greek sarcophaguses, even on the other ones over here. There are also a lot of sarcophaguses with Egyptian hieroglyphics or Phoenician carvings on them, which are primarily excavated from a site in Lebanon back in Ottoman days. So inside the same complex as the Archaeology Museum, there's this other museum called, I believe, the Museum of the Ancient Orient, which has a lot more stuff from ancient Egypt and the surrounding areas of Mesopotamia, because you have to remember all of that was also under Ottoman rule at one point. And I think the most important or the most interesting object in this museum for me is this little thing, which is an Egyptian Hittite peace treaty from 3,500 years ago that was signed between the ancient Egyptians and the kingdom of the Hittites that controlled much of Anatolia, which is Turkey today. It is believed to be the oldest surviving peace treaty in the world, along with its counterpart that was found in ancient Egypt. So this is really cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
You too. Catch you guys later. So I was literally walking past the baklava shop that I usually go to, and I ran into my friend Hassan, who runs the shop, and he gave me a free baklava. Turkish hospitality, guys. I've never seen this anywhere else.
Yes, please. Come. Thanks. 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 Thanks.
Okay, so I'm gonna fast forward a little bit from ancient Greece, move to the 3rd century AD, and talk about one of the most important statesmen in history and one of the biggest Roman emperors, Constantine the Great. Constantine reigned from the end of the 3rd century to the start of the 4th century AD. He did a lot of very, very important things. He brought together a lot of the factions of the Roman Empire that were fighting against each other and combined them to one big Roman Empire. And he also moved the capital of the Roman Empire east to Byzantium, which is Istanbul today, and he renamed it to Constantinople after himself. And he put up this massive column called the Column of Constantinople. Constantine also did a lot of other very historic stuff. He was the first ever Roman emperor to become a Christian, and he legalized Christianity, stopping the persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire. So 40 years after Constantine the Great came another Roman emperor named Theodosius the Great, who made even a bigger impact for Christianity. Theodosius went on to make Christianity the state religion, becoming the first ever emperor of a major empire to do so. And the world would never be the same again after that. Constantinople became the center of the Christian world, and it would stay that way for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's hard to overstate the impact that Theodosius had on the state of Christianity and world history, and he's considered a saint by a lot of Christians today. And in order to commemorate Theodosius, instead of building a column like it was done for Constantine, they made an obelisk for him behind me called the Theodosius obelisk. Now if you pay close attention to the carvings on the obelisk, you might think that this looks like something straight out of Egypt, and it is. This was an obelisk built for a king 3,500 years ago, so 1800 years before Theodosius was born, and they had it transported from Egypt to here to erect it all the way over here. So now for Emperor number 3, let's talk about Justinian the Great, arguably the greatest Byzantine emperor of all time. So this guy came along around 150 years after Theodosius, and he was on a mission to conquer as much area as possible. He went on to control large parts of Europe, the Middle East, even the entire North African coast and parts of Egypt. And he took the Byzantine Empire to its prime. It was never bigger than that ever again after his reign. And he also wanted to establish himself as a central figure of Christianity, a central spiritual figure. So he went on to build this building that is probably the most famous one in Turkey and probably one of the most famous places of worship in the entire world, the Hagia Sophia. So that massive building behind me right there is the Hagia Sophia, which was built in 537 by Justinian the Great. And this building really changed world architecture, and that is not an overstatement. This is 180 feet tall, or 55 meters. And it was the biggest building of worship in the whole world for, I think, around 1,000 years. And it was also the central cathedral of the East Orthodox Christian Church until 1453, when something happened that would change the course of world history forever. So over the centuries, the Byzantine Empire lost a lot of land, and by the time the 15th century arrived, the Byzantine Empire was a fraction of what it once used to be. But the center of it, Constantinople, still stood strong in the middle of all these other empires that were taking over the area. And it was primarily because the city was surrounded on most sides by water, and on the west with these series of walls, the infamous walls of Constantinople, that were impenetrable for 1,000 years. A lot of kings, including Ottoman sultans, tried to break through these walls and failed miserably. But in 1453, Mehmed II, the Sultan of the Ottomans, who is now more often called Mehmed the Conqueror, broke through these walls and took over Constantinople. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves through the whole continent, if not the whole world, marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and marked the start of the Ottoman Empire with Istanbul as its capital city. And over here you can see one of the last remaining towers of the outer walls of Constantinople. So right after Mehmed II conquered Constantinople, the very first thing he did was take his horse straight here to the Hagia Sophia, bring an imam, and then host the Friday Islamic prayers. So the central cathedral of Eastern Orthodox Christianity turned almost overnight into one of the world's largest and most important mosques. One of the most interesting things was they removed all the Christian symbols from the Hagia Sophia and replaced them with Arabic calligraphy and Islamic writing, as you can see all around me. In 1935, after the Republic of Turkey emerged from the Ottoman Empire, they turned it into a museum, but last year in 2020, they turned it back again into a mosque. So now there are separations in the mosque in places where the tourists can visit and in places where people come to pray. I've had the privilege of going to a lot of very impressive historical buildings so far in my life, but I've only been to two places that make me feel like I'm inside a living work of art from the architecture, and that would be this building right here and the St. Peter's Church at the Vatican, which was even bigger than this. But this really is impressive. I think this is my 10th time coming to this place, and it definitely won't be the last time. So the next thing that Sultan Mehmed wanted to do was make a palace that was fit for a king, and then he built the Topkapi Palace. We are at the Topkapi Palace right now. The most interesting thing about this palace that sets it apart from all other palaces in Europe at least is the structure of the whole thing. There's no huge tall castle in the middle where the king is living. You have to remember that the Ottomans were nomadic tribes in the past, moving around in horses and setting up encampments and tents. And then the way they would set it up is they would have a bunch of low tents. The most important person, the Sultan, would be at the middle of the tent, in the middle of all the other tents. This was done partly for security. That way the Sultan would be at the center of the tent or of the palace, and if anyone wanted to get to him, they would have to go through all these other tents, or all these other buildings and courtyards in this case. So this place not only was the residence of the Sultan or the king, but it was also the administrative center of the whole Ottoman Empire. So comparing to the US, that would be the equivalent of having the White House and Capitol Hill in the same place. It was also the art and cultural center as well. And now it's been turned into a museum that we can go around and see. But the most important thing for me, at least they have here, are relics from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and other very important prophets. Objects owned by them are still at this palace. And this is the only place on earth where you can come and see these things. So once you're inside the Topkapi Palace, there's a lot of gates you have to go through. And one of the important gates is the Gate of Salutation. And this was the gate where only the Sultan was allowed to enter on horseback. So everyone else except for him had to get off their horses and walk in. There's a stepping stone outside the gate where all the horses with the high officials would come, and they would like step off and the next horse would come. I just saw some stuff which has probably more historical significance than anything I've ever seen. Well, let me give you a backstory so this makes more sense. Since the start of Islam, there had basically been this Islamic caliphates. From what I understand, there were essentially Islamic governments that were governing over the areas of Mecca, Medina. And the head of this government was termed the Caliph, and his job was to defend the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. And the caliphates had changed a few times over the centuries as the balance of power had shifted in the Middle East and North Africa. Until 1517, it was controlled by the Mamluk dynasty, which was based in Cairo in Egypt. In 1517, the Ottomans beat the Mamluks in a war, conquered Egypt, and took over the whole area of the Middle East and the Mecca and Medina. And that was the start of the Ottoman Caliphate. The Ottoman Sultan, whoever that was also the Islamic Caliph, and it was his job to be the defender of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina and the defender of Islam in a sense. And one of the things that happened when this transfership of caliphates happened in 1517, where these valuable objects, which were belongings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were passed on to the Ottoman Caliphate. And they were brought right here in Topkapi Palace. And over the years, the Ottoman sultans collected more and more belongings, and they were all still in display in Topkapi Palace. And you can come and see it. And surprisingly, not a lot of people actually know about this. But there is the staff of Prophet Moses, which he used to part the sea, right up on display. There's the sword of David. There's the turban of Prophet Yusuf or Joseph. There's a dress that belongs to Hazrat Fatima. Then there's the sword that belonged to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him himself. His teeth are on display in a case, but they're there. Teeth that he lost in a battle when he was hit by an axe, I think. His handwriting, you can see it over there because a letter of him is preserved. His beard is still there in a casing, you can go see it. The pot that he used to drink water from is still there. It's really hard to find so many things that belong to the people that changed the world in inconceivable ways, if you're talking about ancient times especially. And you can see all their belongings in here in Topkapi Palace, and it costs what, maybe $12 to get in and see it? It's really incredible. Right now I'm in the side streets of the Grand Bazaar, which is also, by the way, started by the Ottomans right after Istanbul was captured. But that's a whole lot of other history that we're not going to get into in this video. So right now I'm at the Suleymaniye Mosque, which was built during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, arguably the greatest Ottoman Empire of all time. He came to power in 1520. He established himself as one of the most important statesmen in Europe during the 16th century altogether. He defeated numerous Christian kings at Belgrade, at Rhodes, and expanded the Ottoman Empire largely over North Africa and the Middle East, and even to different parts of Europe. He also made a lot of very important judicial changes in the Ottoman Empire regarding criminal law, regarding education and taxation to benefit the people in the Ottoman Empire. So he's a very popular Ottoman Sultan among the Turks to this day. And he also oversaw what is called the golden age of Ottoman art, literature, and architecture. He had his chief Ottoman architect, Mimar Sinan, build this mosque between the years of 1550 and 1557. And Mimar Sinan is widely considered the greatest Ottoman architect of all time. Like the Pope had his Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, the Ottomans had their Mimar Sinan, who made more than 300 Ottoman structures. And he has a lot of famous mosques, but probably none more famous than this one right here, the Suleymaniye Mosque, which is the second largest mosque in all of Europe. And if you ever ask a Turkish person what their favorite mosque is, they're almost certainly going to tell you it's this one. The size of this mosque should probably put you in awe the moment you step in here. But what's really impressive is the special architecture. So you see that top dome? That is very high. Interestingly, that dome is supported by 4 mini domes under it. And that was a very unique style that Sinan used in his other mosques as well. Because this was meant to be the mosque for the city, the mosque for the king, they constructed the pillars by bringing pillars from different parts of the Ottoman Empire. So there's a pillar that was taken from Topkapi Palace. There was a pillar that was taken from Alexandria, Egypt. There was a pillar that was brought in from Lebanon, just to symbolize that this mosque really is at the center of the Ottoman Empire. Suleiman the Magnificent was actually buried in this graveyard behind the mosque over here, and you can still come and see his grave, visit his grave, and the graves of his relatives. And the architect Sinan, iconically, was also buried right next to this mosque on the other side over there. I think one of the things that's really cool about this mosque is that if you step outside for a look, you can see all of Galata, which is the neighborhood beyond this body of water that is known as the historic Golden Horn. And this area provides a pretty nice view of that inlet and the Bosphorus Sea. Was this the end of the Ottoman Empire and history in Istanbul? Of course not, but there's only so much I can fit in one video. If you like this video, don't forget to like it. If you want a more real-time update of these places, like a few months before I actually make the videos, do follow me on Instagram. I post a lot of real-time updates there because these videos take a long time to edit. I'm gonna end the vlog here. I'll catch you guys on the next one.